Success isn't just about skills, it's about how you're perceived. In this story, a man learns the hard truth that his poor look, his lack of confidence and self-presentation, is his biggest enemy. By adopting Machiavelli's powerful strategies, he transforms himself and starts commanding the respect and success he's always desired. In the heart of New York City, success is often measured by how you present yourself. You might believe that hard work and skills are enough to get ahead. But one conversation with your boss, Adam, opens your eyes to the truth. How others perceive you can be just as important as what you do. Adam, a man of power and authority, had always intrigued you. He didn't just speak, he commanded attention. His presence alone could change the course of a meeting. You, on the other hand, had always been the quiet achiever, focused on your work, convinced that results would speak for themselves. But during a conversation in his office, Adam told you something that shook you to the core. You're capable, but you lack presence, he said. Your poor look, the way you carry yourself, holds you back. It's not about what you know, but how you're seen. Those words hit you hard. For the first time, you realized that no matter how skilled you weren't being perceived as powerful. You were invisible in ways you hadn't even considered. That night, you reflected on Adam's words. You had always kept a low profile, avoiding attention, staying quiet in meetings, and never asserting yourself. You had thought your technical abilities would be enough, but now you saw that how you carried yourself was equally important. Confidence, strength, and authority weren't just traits of powerful people, they were visible traits, projected through body language, tone, and presence. You remembered something from your college days, Machiavelli's The Prince. He had written about the importance of appearances, how rulers must appear powerful even when they aren't. You hadn't fully understood it then, but now it made perfect sense. You needed to change how you were seen, starting with your posture, your tone, and your approach to every interaction. The next day you made small changes. You stood taller, spoke slower, and made sure to make eye contact. It felt awkward at first, but as you practiced, you started to notice the difference. People were paying more attention to you. Your colleagues started seeking your input, your voice became stronger, and your presence began to command respect. Soon you realized that this shift in how you were perceived had an immediate impact. Your career was no longer at a standstill. You had learned to present yourself with the confidence and power that people recognized and respected. The transformation wasn't just about looking stronger, it was about truly owning your presence and projecting an image of control. Adam had been right. Your poor look had been holding you back. But now, by mastering how you were seen, you unlocked the door to success. The key wasn't just in the work you did, but in how you carried yourself. Power and respect came from within, but it had to be visible to the world. After Adam's blunt but insightful feedback, a sense of urgency consumed you. You could no longer ignore the fact that your poor look was holding you back. You had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, assuming that competence and hard work were enough. But now you understood the harsh reality. The way people saw you mattered more than you had ever realized. Over the next few days, you reflected deeply on Adam's words. The more you thought about it, the more it became clear. You had been invisible in the most important ways. It wasn't just about your abilities, it was about your presence, or lack thereof. Confidence, authority, and control were things you had never prioritized. You hadn't taken the time to develop a commanding presence, and now you could see how others had subconsciously dismissed you as unworthy of attention. You started to pay attention to your own behavior, the subtle signals you had been sending to others. Every time you entered a room, you shrank into the background, avoiding eye contact, sitting quietly in meetings, and letting others take the lead. When you did speak, your voice lacked conviction, and you never took up space. You were being overlooked not because you weren't good enough, but because you weren't showing the world that you were worthy of being noticed. The realization was both painful and freeing. You now understood that you had been your own worst enemy. It wasn't your work or your talent that was the problem. It was the image you projected. Power, you realized, wasn't just about what you could do. It was about what others believed you could do. And for them to believe in your power, you had to show it. That's when you turned to the teachings of Machiavelli. You remembered reading The Prince years ago, but now the book felt like a manual for survival in the world you were navigating. Machiavelli had written about the importance of appearances, about how rulers must be seen as strong, decisive, and unyielding, whether they felt that way inside or not. You realized you could apply this principle to your own life. You didn't need to feel powerful. You needed to look powerful. The next step was clear. You had to start mastering the art of presence. It wasn't enough to simply feel confident. You needed to embody it. You began by making small but significant changes, standing up straight, making deliberate eye contact, speaking with a controlled voice. You practiced in front of the mirror, becoming aware of every gesture and expression. At first it felt unnatural, but with time, it started to feel more like a new part of you, one that you had always had the potential to become. The changes weren't instant, but they were noticeable. In meetings, you started to speak up more, offering your insights with confidence. You took up more space in the room, physically and mentally, and noticed that people were responding to you differently. Your colleagues were listening more attentively, and even your boss, Adam, seemed to treat you with more respect. The shift was subtle at first, but over time, it became undeniable. You were no longer the invisible man in the room. You were someone others saw as worthy of attention. But the most important change was how you began to see yourself. For the first time, you felt in control of your image and how others perceived you. You understood that perception was a powerful tool. By controlling the way you presented yourself, you could control the way others treated you. And that, you realized, was the key to unlocking your success. In the following weeks, your career began to gain momentum. The projects you worked on were given more visibility, and the respect from your colleagues grew. What was once a struggle to be seen now felt like an effortless flow of opportunity. You had learned that the true enemy wasn't your lack of skill or your hard work. It was your inability to project the image of power and confidence. And now you had mastered that. You had faced your biggest enemy, yourself, and you were winning. The first few days after deciding to change felt strange. You had always been the one who stayed in the background, never drawing too much attention to yourself. Now you were determined to project strength and confidence in every interaction, but it wasn't as easy as it seemed. Every time you stood tall or made eye contact, a part of you felt like you were pretending. It felt unnatural, forced, like you were playing a role instead of being yourself. But then you remembered what Adam had said. It wasn't about being someone else. It was about unlocking the power you already had inside. The truth was, you had always been capable, always been skilled. What you hadn't done was show the world that you were. And showing the world that you had power wasn't about pretending to be someone else. It was about becoming the version of yourself that others could see as strong, capable, and confident. At first, you started with small adjustments. You began walking with purpose, keeping your head high and shoulders back. When you entered a room, you no longer shrank into the corner, hoping to remain unnoticed. You stood tall, claiming your space. It wasn't about arrogance or demanding attention. It was about showing that you belonged in the room, that you had a right to be there. In meetings, you made a conscious effort to speak up, even if it was just to offer a small insight. Your voice was steady, measured, no more rushing through your words. You paused, letting your points land with impact. You didn't need to dominate the conversation, but you also didn't want to fade into the background. You learned the art of speaking with authority, and it became easier as you practiced. The first real test came when you were asked to lead a team meeting. In the past, this would have sent you into a spiral of anxiety. You'd have prepared relentlessly, worried about making a mistake, about being judged. But this time, you felt different. You had spent weeks practicing how to carry yourself, how to present yourself, how to speak with confidence. This time, you weren't just going through the motions, you were owning the room. When the meeting started, you felt the familiar nerves bubble up, but they didn't control you. You took a deep breath, stood tall, and made eye contact with everyone around the table. You started by setting the tone of the meeting, speaking clearly and confidently about what needed to be done. As you spoke, you noticed your team members were listening closely, nodding along. They weren't just hearing you, they were respecting you. By the end of the meeting, something had shifted. The team was energized, motivated, and more importantly, they saw you in a new light. You weren't just the person who sat in the back anymore. You were the leader, the one who was capable of guiding them. The respect you'd longed for, the recognition you hadn't received before, was finally coming to you. Not because you were doing more work, but because you were presenting yourself as someone worthy of respect. Over the following weeks, the transformation continued. The changes in how you carried yourself became more ingrained in your daily life. People started approaching you for advice, asking for your opinion. Your ideas, once dismissed, were now taken seriously. You had become someone others wanted to work with, someone they trusted to lead. The power you had longed for was now within your reach, and it wasn't because of your technical skills. It was because you had learned to command the respect of others through how you presented yourself. But the biggest shift was internal. For the first time, you saw yourself as someone worthy of success. You realized that power wasn't just about what you did. It was about how you made others feel. And you had learned how to make people feel that you were in control, that you were capable, that you were someone who could be relied upon. You weren't perfect, and you still had moments of self-doubt. But now when those doubts crept in, you knew how to stand tall and push them aside. You had learned that to gain success, you had to first believe in your own power, and then show the world that belief. By embracing Machiavelli's teachings, you had transformed yourself. You had unlocked a version of yourself that was more powerful, more confident, and more capable than ever before. The path wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. You had learned the secret. Power comes not just from what you do, but from how you present yourself to the world. The shift was undeniable. What had once been a quiet, unnoticed existence was now a life filled with new opportunities and respect. The transformation you had worked so hard to achieve was taking hold in ways you hadn't expected. People around you were changing how they treated you, and so was the world. The respect you had longed for, the influence you had wished for, was slowly becoming your reality. But success, you learned, wasn't just about the way others saw you. It was also about how you began to see yourself. No longer was the poor look you carried before a part of you. It had been replaced by a confident, powerful presence that was not just visible in your body language or voice. It had become a part of your very identity. One afternoon, you were invited to a strategic planning meeting, a meeting that had once been reserved for the higher-ups in the company. You had prepared for the meeting the same way you always did, with determination, focus, and clarity. But this time, there was a noticeable difference. You weren't just there to contribute your knowledge. You were there to lead. As you walked into the room, you felt a sense of calm power. You had already seen how much your presence affected others, and you were ready to own this moment. Your colleagues, once hesitant to involve you in high-level discussions, now welcomed your input. Every time you spoke, there was no doubt in their eyes. Your voice carried authority. The meeting was intense, with discussions about the future of the company and some bold decisions that needed to be made. In the past, you might have hesitated, second-guessed yourself, or waited for someone else to take charge. But today was different. You spoke up, offering insights that were grounded in your expertise. But more importantly, you spoke with the confidence that made others sit up and listen. One key moment came when a senior executive raised a concern about the direction the company was headed. Normally, this would have been a moment where you stayed silent, deferring to the higher-ups. But this time, you didn't. You took a breath and spoke clearly, presenting an alternative viewpoint. It wasn't just the content of your words, it was the way you delivered them. Your tone was firm but respectful, and your body language reinforced the strength behind your message. The room grew quiet as you spoke, and by the time you finished, there was a shift. You had gained their attention and respect, not just for your expertise, but for your presence. You weren't just a passive participant anymore. You were now a force to be reckoned with. The respect you had fought for, the recognition you had craved, was finally there. Your colleagues, once dismissive or indifferent, now sought your opinion. The higher-ups, who had previously overlooked you, now turned to you for guidance. The shift was not just in how they saw you, but in how they treated you. You had moved from the sidelines to the center of the action, from someone who was passed over to someone who was sought after. As the meeting ended and your colleagues filed out of the room, you sat for a moment, reflecting. This was the moment you had been working for. You had gained more than just respect. You had gained influence. You had gained control over your own destiny. The invisible man you once were had been replaced by a version of yourself who demanded attention, respect, and authority. But you knew this was only the beginning. The journey wasn't over. Now that you had this power, you had to learn how to wield it wisely. You had to continue projecting confidence, continue demonstrating your value, and most importantly, continue to master the art of perception. In the weeks that followed, the momentum continued to build. You were entrusted with larger projects. Your voice became a crucial one in decision-making processes, and you began mentoring others, passing on the lessons you had learned. The power you had gained wasn't fleeting. It was becoming ingrained in your professional identity. Looking back, you realized that the transformation had not just been about changing how others saw you, it had been about changing how you saw yourself. The key to success wasn't just in your skills, it was in how you presented yourself, how you made others perceive your value. And now you had unlocked that power. The shift had been complete. You had learned that power isn't just about gaining respect from others. It's about claiming it, owning it, and then using it to create the life you want. You had faced your biggest challenge, and now you were ready for whatever came next. The power you had gained, though hard-earned, was becoming second nature. Every meeting, every decision, every interaction now felt different. You had learned that success wasn't just about what you knew. It was about how you presented yourself to the world. The transformation you had undergone was complete. But now you faced a new challenge: how to maintain and build upon the power you had worked so hard to achieve. The first step was to continue embodying the lessons you had learned. Confidence and presence couldn't be faked. They had to come from within and had to be consistently reinforced. You couldn't allow complacency to creep in. Just because you had won respect didn't mean you could stop working on yourself. Power, you understood, was fragile. It could be lost just as easily as it was gained if you didn't continue to assert your value. Your days were now filled with new opportunities. You were assigned to lead projects that had once seemed out of reach, and your voice was heard in high-stakes discussions. People sought your advice, not because you were the loudest in the room, but because you had earned your place through your actions, your presence, and your ability to inspire confidence in others. The more you took on, the more you realized that with power came responsibility. You had become the person people turned to when they needed guidance, the one who led by example. But it wasn't always easy. With success came greater pressure. There were still moments of doubt, times when you questioned whether you were truly capable of handling it all. But you had learned to face those doubts head-on, to acknowledge them without letting them control you. You knew that confidence didn't mean being free of fear. It meant taking action despite that fear. In those moments of uncertainty, you returned to the core lesson you had learned from Machiavelli. Appearance and perception were key, but so was maintaining your integrity. Success wasn't just about looking powerful. It was about being powerful, making decisions that reflected your values, and earning respect through your actions. Not just your image. You found a balance between projecting strength and remaining grounded. You continued to refine your presence, but now it was as much about leading others as it was about asserting your own worth. The real success was in watching your influence grow and knowing that you had built something sustainable, something that wasn't reliant on anyone else's approval. Looking back, you couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. You had faced your own weaknesses and transformed them into strengths. You had learned that success was not a destination, but a continuous journey. Each day was a new opportunity to maintain and build upon the power you had unlocked. As you stood in front of a new team, preparing to lead yet another challenging project, you realized that the most powerful tool you possessed wasn't just your knowledge or skill. It was your ability to continuously evolve, to remain true to yourself, and to project your inner power to the world. And in doing so, you had mastered success, not through external validation, but by believing in your own worth and showing the world that you were capable of achieving anything you set your mind to. You've learned that real success isn't just about hard work. It's about showing up as your most powerful self. But what comes next? The journey is far from over. There are even greater challenges ahead, and you've only just scratched the surface. Want to continue unlocking the secrets to mastering success? confidence, and power? Don't miss out. Subscribe now to stay on the path toward achieving everything you've always wanted. The next chapter of your journey is about to begin, and trust me, you won't want to miss it.